morning, please welcome Jack Lowe.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Next. Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed the keynotes. As you heard, we've been making a tremendous amount of investment here at Google to try to help enterprises come to the cloud and address your most critical, most important business challenges. The keynotes were packed, as we all know. There are a lot of people still trickling in. Unfortunately, I'll have to go through this a little bit quicker, so we'll get you back on schedule for all-important lunchtime. But again, my name is Jack, and I have the privilege and the honor to speak about a topic that I'm personally very passionate about, namely how to help enterprises bring together your on-prem environments with Google Cloud. So as you heard in the keynotes, we believe that there's this nirvana ahead of building cloud-native applications. And in fact, at Google, over the past 2 decades, we've been building applications that support billions of users. In fact, there are 8 applications ranging from search and YouTube, Gmail, et cetera, that actually have taught us the value of building cloud-native applications. Now, as we move to public cloud, we do believe that this is ultimately the end state that everyone should be striving for. When you actually build applications in this style, not only do you have the ability to have them portable, but as you containerize applications, you take the benefits of operational efficiencies. You can actually decouple applications from operating system upgrades. You can help your developers be more efficient. Oftentimes, you're breaking them into microservices, so individual teams can work separately and upgrade on their own cadence rather than having to coordinate a large monolith. And in fact, these basically are some of the reasons that this model, by increasing your operational efficiency and helping your agility, this is really what drives a lot of the new directions in cloud and in software development. But as much as we want to go up to that direction, the reality is that the majority of applications today are down in what we would consider this lower left quadrant. They're sitting on-prem, they're classic applications, large monoliths, not easy to upgrade, not easy to kind of modify, sometimes difficult to maintain. And so the question is, what do we actually do to address these applications? Ultimately, we want to take these workloads and try to find a way to get to the upper right. Unfortunately, that's just not so straightforward. You can have a whole host of reasons why your applications might be difficult to move to a new development model or even a new deployment model. A wholesale migration like this may seem extremely daunting for most enterprises. You might say, well, I'm a risk taker, or I actually believe in the future, and so I'm going to try to rip and replace. This is one term that oftentimes people use to say, essentially, I'm going to start over. I actually have an important application. I'm going to re-architect it. I'm going to rewrite it so that I can get these opportunities that come with a cloud-native application in the public cloud. But given the practical challenges and complexities with such an approach, this is not the path that most of the time you'll take. So let's look at a few more incremental journeys to get to this upper right nirvana. So lift and shift. You've probably all heard about this approach where we're taking existing applications and largely moving them as is to the public cloud. Sometimes this ends up being the most pragmatic approach. And the reasons might be because the applications are coming from a third-party ISV. You may not have source code them, so it's not easy for you to rewrite them or re-architect them in a modern way. Or perhaps you actually do have the source code, but these are applications that were written by developers many, many years ago, most of whom may not even be at the company anymore. Or they're a little bit brittle and fragile. So you're worried about can you actually make substantial changes? Because the application is working just fine today. So in these cases, moving to public cloud can still bring you benefits. The question is, how do you actually make that migration smooth and easy? And later on in this talk, I'll describe a few ways we've been doing that here at Google. But even if you just move the application as is, the migration to public cloud can still bring you a lot of benefits. For example, you might be running into a situation where you have to upgrade your physical infrastructure, or turning down your data centers. And you have to make a decision anyway about where you're going to run your workloads. At this point, if you move the applications to GCP, you can still get the benefits of efficiency because now you don't have to worry about managing the physical infrastructure. With capabilities like our live migration in Google Compute Engine, we handle the upgrades of the servers and the low-level software on the machines while the applications continue to run. One great example of this recently was the processor vulnerabilities, Spectre and Meltdown. These were the largest security vulnerabilities that have been discovered in decades. We were able on Google Cloud to be able to keep your applications and workloads continually running without actually having to disrupt the applications and make those patches to the underlying software. That's something that reduces an operational burden from your staff. Now, beyond lift and shift, you might say, well, for some of my workloads, I can take it one incremental step further, what you might term as lift and modernize or lift and replatform. And so what we mean by this approach or this journey is to take the step of, say, a workload that's running on premises and then moving it to a managed service. So a great example of this might be a database, where you can now move it from an on-premise database to Cloud SQL, or take your on-premise Redis instance and move it to Cloud Memory Store. With this path, with this journey, you no longer have to manage the service itself. That's handled by Google. And it allows you to just move your application without any code changes. Again, a slightly lower friction migration path that's available to you to help you on your journey to cloud native. Alternately, there's another direction, which is to improve first and then move. And by this, what we mean is thinking about some of the applications that you have today and deciding to take that step and start to containerize them. So separate the application from the operating system, as mentioned in the keynotes, using Kubernetes to start to orchestrate these containers and the deployment and management of these applications. Most IT organizations have already been adopting Kubernetes for at least some of the applications and services. And then once you've learned the technology, learned the deployment practices, it becomes much easier to take that next step to move to the cloud. Right. Now, I'll mention yet another journey here. In addition to lift and shift, lift and improve, improve and move, is build and connect. So this is a little bit more about an architecture style rather than a form of migration. And what I mean by architecture is some of your complex applications and services may have many, many components. Some that are going to stay on premises, some that will be running in the cloud. And in this kind of an environment or architecture, you'd be looking at how to use things like Apogee and developing API gateways to connect the various components of your system that span your multiple locations. I'll talk briefly about this later in the talk. But at this point, the thing that comes through if you look at all these journeys is that it's a complex path to get to the cloud. It can certainly be very daunting. Most of you live in a very diverse, heterogeneous world where you have applications that are these shrink-wrapped apps. Some of them you've developed in-house. Others might be SaaS apps. And then on top of that, you have lots of different data centers and environments, some that you own, some that may be in a managed service provider, some that are in the cloud. And you may be using multiple clouds. At Google, we recognize that enterprises are complex. And while we have a path that we think is the right direction to take, ultimately, we want to meet you where you are. It's important to let you run what you want, where you want, to satisfy your business objectives. So how do you get started? I think an important thing to think about is, what are your goals? Are you trying to move everything as quickly as you can to the cloud? Or do you want to take a more incremental approach? As we meet with customers, oftentimes what people look at is, what are some of the easiest applications to move first? So pick some of your test dev applications. But also start planning an architecture that allows you to move your more complex workloads eventually. So breaking it up into waves and phases. Part of the effort here is also around understanding, first discovering what applications you have, how can you assess whether these are good applications to move, do the planning, and then finally do the migration, and then once you've migrated them, optimize them. So there's some multiple sessions here at the conference where people go into more detail about the programs that are available through partners, through PSO, to help you with this full migration process. But now that we've talked about some approaches at a per application level, let's take a step back and think about the holistic picture. In the keynote, Urs described the notion of hybrid. And so ultimately what you need to have is the infrastructure and framework to think about how you manage a diverse set of applications across a diverse set of locations. And this is also a very critical part of your cloud journey. So what is hybrid? I think if you ask all the people, the probably 500 people in the room, we might get 400 different answers of exactly what hybrid means. It has a lot of different interpretations. But for the purposes of this talk, I think where I want to focus on is just the recognition that you do have multiple locations and multiple applications and services that need to run in a location that suits you. And again, put simply, do what you want, where you want. And what we found is that this approach is something that resonates with customers. This is a survey of cloud users by IDC recently. And they found that 87% of cloud users are hybrid. More than half of them have multiple kinds of cloud deployments in their organization. And a large fraction of them, 40%, are cloud first. So a lot of these trends are very likely to be accelerating. Practically speaking, hybrid is a reality. It's a state that exists now. It's going to continue to increase. And it's going to be a state that's going to be here for years to come. So how do you think about what you want to do around hybrid? One way is to break it up into layers in an overall architecture, starting with the network, then looking at the application layer, and then the management layer. So let's look at each of these in turn. So networking, obviously, is the underpinnings. And in a sec, I will go into some examples of how you might build your hybrid network. At the application layer, this is where there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of technology, a lot of opportunity, leveraging the latest technologies like containers and serverless. As we heard in the keynotes this morning, the cloud services platform and GKE on-prem are examples of how you actually build your applications and services and spread across your hybrid infrastructure. Now, and then on the highest layer, thinking about management. So let's go through a couple of these. Starting here. So networking. So with networking at Google Cloud, one important step in providing a hybrid infrastructure is figuring out how to connect your on-premise data center with Google Cloud. So the virtual private cloud, or VPC, is a way to actually create an isolated network in GCP for your own private access. It allows you to make GCP look like your own network. But when you connect it to your own data center, then it becomes simply an extension of your on-premises footprint. But it's more than just connecting a single data center to one GCP region. A single VPC can actually span multiple regions across the globe without having to go out onto the public internet. So why is that important? Well, for several reasons. One, from that single on-premise data center, you've now been able to connect to all of the Google regions. You don't actually have to set up a separate, different connection from your data center to each of the regions that you want to operate in. Secondly, it gives you much lower and more predictable latencies when you actually have to connect across these regions, especially for those services that you have that are large-scale global services, because you don't have to go out into the public internet. And then finally, having a global VPC really helps you in terms of manageability, because you can now have a single VPC policy that spans this network. And from a management standpoint, that simplifies your problem. So let's say you actually wanted to take advantage of these technologies. What are some of the steps that you would take? So there are 3 different options to connect your data center to GCP. The first is to use a more traditional VPN-like approach. So with Cloud VPN, you connect your GCP project to an on-premise VPN gateway. And then now you can encrypt data in transit. For some customers, your requirements might be more substantial. And so you could choose to go down the dedicated interconnect route. With dedicated interconnect, you bring your network and you meet it at one of our dedicated interconnect points of presence. We have more than 70 dedicated POPs across worldwide and are continuing to add to them. With each of these interconnect points, you can get increments of 10 gigabits per second of bandwidth. But for some customers, perhaps you don't have such demanding networking needs. And that's why we have a third option, which is called partner interconnect. This might be a case where you're not really close to, or your data centers aren't sufficiently close to one of our points of presence. And so what you do is you actually work with a partner. The partner it has a peering location with GCP, and then you bring your network to the partner's, you peer with the partner. This is a turnkey solution integrated into the console, and it allows you to have a more flexible set of networking options, up to 10 gigabits per second per VLAN, all the way down to 50 megabits per second. So that provides the basic infrastructure that you need for a hybrid architecture. Moving up the stack to the application layer, there are many other talks at the conference where people will go into detail here. We could spend hours talking about what you would want to build for hybrid applications. I think here I just want to highlight a few of the basic principles, namely around portability, abstraction, and automation. So the ideas here are you want to have a set of designs that allow services and components to interoperate in a meaningful way. And so standardizing on open source components, open APIs are a key part of it. And then once you do this, you want to be able to automate and be able to manage at scale. And then finally, moving up to the management layer. Here you could choose to take a variety of approaches depending on what you may have standardized in your environment and what you may decide you want to actually change in your environment. Basically, it's kind of your appetite for change. So at the management layer, one of the most critical pieces of your stack is around monitoring. So you need to have a way to have ongoing monitoring of the health of your applications and services. And Stackdriver provides a suite of tools that give you operational awareness. There's a set of tools for logging and monitoring the services that are running inside of, say, virtual machines or running in terms of other containers. And it doesn't matter where they're running. They could be on GCP. They could be running on-premise. They could be running elsewhere. And this is one way to kind of unify your management of your workloads. A second path is Kubernetes. As was announced this morning, with GKE on-prem, we now have the ability to have a single control experience that manages across the cloud and on premises. So no matter where you run them, on your inner data centers or in the cloud, you can have a consistent experience. And the third one is maybe aimed at some of you who might have a VMware environment. So you might have lots of tools and practices built up around your VMware infrastructure. We've been partnering with VMware to build a plugin to fit into that set of tools. So we recently, last week, announced that we've been working together on a plugin for vRealize Automation and vRealize Orchestrator. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this environment, essentially what some customers have done is created a portal or sort of their own private cloud. And they create blueprints. This is one of the more common use cases for these tools, where you've identified if some end user wants to actually create an application, you click on a blueprint, it automatically deploys resources. Now, for those people who are using VRO or VRA, the natural extension is be able to back those resources with resources in GCP. And so this plugin allows you to get some of the benefits of cloud while continuing to use your existing management infrastructure. So now you can use a blueprint. The blueprint actually creates virtual machines in Google Compute Engine. And now those workloads can take advantage of things like, basically lower cost compute because you have the various forms of discounts like sustained use or custom community use discounts, the custom machine types. And this environment is now running and using resources in the cloud, even though you're using your existing on-premises management infrastructure. So this plugin is in EAP right now. If you're interested in taking a look, there's a sign up for you to take part. I'll give folks a second to take a picture. All right. So we've talked a little bit about various journeys that you would take for applications to get to the cloud. We've talked a little bit about a hybrid architecture that you might want to think about when you're coming in the cloud. But you still have to figure out how you can move those actual workloads and that data as quickly as possible. So if you're going down this path, what are some of the biggest challenges you're going to run into? A recent survey showed that most migration projects, unfortunately, aren't super successful. About 94% of them run into delays. They're over budget. We've often heard even of cases where people have moved workloads to the cloud only to move them back because of something they didn't realize, something they didn't plan for properly. Why is this hard? Well, a lot of organizations have not just hundreds, but maybe thousands of workloads and applications that they need to move. So how do you handle the scale? How do you figure out which applications to move, what the dependencies are? It's pretty daunting. Not to mention the fact that organizationally, you'll have different owners of these applications, and you may need to get their approval in the migration process. Another area of complexity is they come from different sources. Many of them could be running in virtual machines on VMware. They could be running on physical. Some of them could be in another cloud, and you want to move them to GCP. Of course, we have also complexity. Your most mission-critical workloads, say it's an SAP or an Oracle database, these are applications that are business-critical. You do want to take advantage of moving them to the cloud. But the problem is you can't take any business risk. And you don't even want to take any downtime, or at least keep that downtime to an absolute minimum. So those concerns lead into this question of risk. How can you actually prepare yourself and test? And is there a way that you can make sure that it's highly likely that workloads succeed when you move them? But in the worst case, if things don't go well, you can roll back. Fortunately, we came across a partner that we've been working with for a while called VELOSTRATA. And we recently announced an acquisition about a month ago that closed. They were already a partner helping with migrations to Google Cloud. But we found that it's a very complementary team, technology, and product. And really what they're enabling us to do is provide an enterprise-grade, purpose-built solution for helping accelerate the migrations of workloads to GCP. Not only can they move from on-premises to Google Cloud, but you can also move from AWS to GCP. So this technology and this product is a real enabler to reducing the friction involved in these complex migrations. One of the key capabilities is that it allows you to move your workloads very quickly, oftentimes with less than 10 minutes of downtime. And that's pretty amazing. Like if you think about how you want to actually reduce the impact and reduce the friction of a migration, if you can reduce that downtime, this is a critical advantage. So the typical migration, what will happen is you'll have a bunch of data, the disks associated with your VMs, and you need to copy that up to the cloud before you can actually migrate. And if it's a large VM with, say, a terabyte virtual disk, that's going to take some time. That could take hours. Now you multiply that by hundreds of workloads or thousands, and you can see how long this process can take. The key insight from the VELOSTRATA team was to look at how you decouple compute from storage. And so the idea is that actually you can stream cloud and stream the storage. So essentially what happens is you take a short downtime period at the beginning, and you start bringing over the most critical pieces of the storage. And there's a lot of intelligence and WAN optimization in this technology that allows you to start that process. And then once you've moved those critical pieces, you can start running your workload in the cloud while the rest of the data gets migrated in the background. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, so let's take a look at this graph. What it shows here is, this is from a customer example. This is showing time on the x-axis, and y is both the number of VMs that are running, that have been moved to the cloud, as well as in green the amount of data that's been migrated. So this customer chose to make 2-week sprints to actually do the migration, and you can see that there's a step function. In the first week, what they would do, if you just kind of blow into one of these sprints, they did some discovery and planning. So picking up, say, 75 VMs that they actually wanted to migrate. So figure out which ones they are, kind of plan internally how they would move them, actual schedule the migration. And then in the second week, do the actual migration. Now, what you can see in this blown-up zoom is that most of the VMs were moved and running in the cloud in hours. Meanwhile, the data is streaming in the background, and in fact, it took about 3 days for all the data to get there. But in this time, the customer was able to actually start running these applications again and not impact their business. And when you think about the amount of time you have to do migrations, this means you can easily do a migration of a large number of workloads over a weekend, and be able to take, rather than trying to look at many, many days of moving a lot of data. So, why is this important? Well, one, minimizing downtime, and then taking advantage of other capabilities in the tool set to be able to validate and increase the confidence that your workloads are successful. As I mentioned earlier, oftentimes less than 10 minutes and you're up and running. You save a lot of manpower. You accelerate the process of migration. And this actually greatly increases the likelihood that a migration project will be successful because you can stay under budget. But earlier I mentioned one of the challenges was around risk and complexity. What this technology also allows you to do is roll back. Unfortunately, there's a conflicting deep dive session right now going on about the VELOSTRATA technology. And so hopefully you can see a video or look at some of the collateral online. But there's also the ability to roll back. Because while we're streaming the data to the cloud, there's still data for that virtual machine running on premises. And if you find for some reason that maybe you forgot to move a workload and that it depends on, or you have some other challenge, you always have the ability to move back. And that safety net, that insurance policy, is very valuable when it comes to actually doing these large-scale migrations. And ultimately, now by getting these migrations to happen, you can get to ramp up your cloud usage much more quickly. Now, in addition to migrating your virtual machines, you may actually also have a lot of data that needs to be migrated. The data transfer appliance is one solution that's available to help take, if you have, say, hundreds of terabytes of data that you need to move to the cloud in addition to your virtual machines, you just can't afford to actually move all that data. This is not necessarily so much for the virtual machines in the VELOSTRATA case, but it could be because you have some data warehouse or other large amounts of data that you need to be able to use while you're in the cloud. So the transfer appliance comes in 2U and 4U form factors with 100 terabyte and 480 terabyte versions. The larger one can handle up to roughly about a petabyte of data compressed. Basically, it's as simple as going to the console, requesting a transfer appliance, you get it, you rack it, you fill it up with data, and then ship it back to us. Basically, this is a solution where you can actually have it sit in the data center for a while and then bring it back to Google Cloud. So now that we've talked a little bit about some of the migration challenges and some of the solutions that are available, I wanted to bring one of our customers from Cardinal Health, John Latshaw, who's the Vice President of Cloud Services at Cardinal, and have him talk a little bit about the company and some of the work they've been doing with Google. John?
Thanks for having me.
So John, can you first tell the audience and tell us a little bit about Cardinal Health, what you guys do?
We do a lot of things, but in summary, we try to make healthcare more efficient and cost-effective. We're a Fortune 15 company with about $130 billion in revenue. about 700 sites and a lot of applications. Not to be too specific.
Yeah.
One other point, if any of you have had the misfortune to be in a hospital or need to get a prescription for some sort of illness, you've probably used our services just going to a CVS or some sort of hospital.
One of the things when I was visiting you guys recently, hearing the stories about like the kind of on-demand nature of the business you're in, like someone ordering something today for a patient that has a procedure tomorrow, and critical services that you have to deliver to make sure that happens.
It's hard to plan emergencies, yeah.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about what prompted Cardinal's migration to the cloud?
Yeah, it's in a nutshell, it's speed and efficiency. So our business is hard to predict. You wouldn't think that from if you look at healthcare, but it's actually a large component of our business is pharmaceutical distribution. So where drugs need to be, where generics might launch, and so a lot of that requires us to turn on a dime, and with traditional infrastructure, it's just hard to do. Whereas conversely with GCP, I can spin up, spin down, all at a moment's notice. And then, although we have $130 billion in revenue, we actually run on grocery store margins, so every penny counts. So we've found that running in the cloud, if you do it the right way, can be considerably more cost effective than doing it ourselves.
Yeah. So with that in mind, I mean, can you talk about some of the best practices or perhaps lessons learned that you guys have experienced?
Yeah, kind of go back a little bit in your presentation. If you haven't heard of VELOSTRATA, go check it out. It's the real deal. We were one of their first customers. Makes a tremendous difference if you're doing any kind of lift and shift or lift and lightly optimized migrations. There's a lot of that we're doing. And it really works as advertised. It sounded a lot like magic to me when they first pitched it, and they've proven to be a great partner, and it works. So on that, we're about a third of the way through, and we've learned a lot of things. I'd say there's one thing that I would say, the technology is not the hardest part of this. So while it is challenging in some aspects, don't worry about that so much. What I would say is get your house in order while you're contemplating moving. Move some non-prod workloads, but before you move production, make sure that your CMDB is accurate and up to date. We had a very complete CMDB. We could go through and say all the fields were filled out. But when we wanted to gain intelligence about our systems, like what systems were part of a business process, what applications needed to talk to what applications on what ports, it wasn't reliable because we never had to use it like that. So spend some time getting that stuff in order and be sure you can answer the right questions about what needs to talk to what. I would say be friends with your finance people. This change is going to have a ripple effect of substantial changes through the finance team. They need to be prepared for direct chargebacks. You don't have to do direct chargebacks. We chose to. It drives the right behavior, but it is a massive adjustment for them. Lastly, partner up, maybe buy your CISO a bottle of their favorite beverage repeatedly. Security folks by their nature are extremely cautious. Google has an enormous emphasis on security, but it's not only their responsibility, it's a joint responsibility. And we've spent a lot of time on bringing the security folks along, getting our CISO on board, getting an endorsement. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. If I had it to do over again, I would spend more time up front on those things and less time worrying about the technology.
All right, great. So can you also talk a little bit about your experience with Google Cloud specifically? What has kind of stood out with that partnership?
A couple things there. One, they've been a great partner. So their product teams have been very curious. We've gotten access to that. So for those that are kind of just dipping the toe in the water, if you've had experience with on-premise companies like, I don't know, a database company that begins with an O, or something like that, and you say, hey, it'd be great to have this feature in your next release. Maybe in a year, 2 years, it might come out. We've had the experience of working with our product teams to say, hey, on your API gateway, we would like this. And they're like, okay, cool. And like literally 6 weeks later, we have that feature. So they've been extremely responsive, extremely curious on what it takes for us to move to the cloud. And it's not an unselfish investment. I mean, we're a lot like every other Fortune 500. We have the widest variety of systems you can imagine, and if Google invests in making us successful, then that just paves the way for everyone else. I found their infrastructure, their network, to be fast and reliable, more so than other cloud providers we've looked at. Live migration is a big feature for us. We did some things internally that I call kind of unnatural acts, but it was to save on licensing fees for like some WebSphere products where we would create a VM that had 2 CPUs but 48 gig of RAM. And we did that because we wanted to save on licensing. So in some cases, we're going to unwind that, and we're going to do it the right way in the cloud. Some cases, we can't. And so that their custom machine size gives us that flexibility to do that instead of the kind of the T-shirt sizing that other cloud providers have.
Great. Well, thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. It's great to have the opportunity of fantastic customers like John and his team, and look forward to collaborating further on their continued journey into the cloud. So before I wrap up here, I want to just highlight a number of sessions. There's actually probably many other ones that are related to the topics that we've talked about, where you can get a little bit deeper. There are some customers who can talk about their experiences moving to GCP. Or if you want to look at other different technologies and products that have done migrations to cloud, here's a few sessions. And as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, that 112 session is going on right now. So I just want to leave you all with a few important takeaways. I think what I would try to do is paint the journeys that you might want to take. And it's really important to recognize that this modernization of IT is important. There's a great opportunity here to improve efficiencies and help your business be, help you accelerate your business rather than having IT infrastructure just be a lot about cost. But ultimately, Google's here to meet you where you are. We have a vision for where we want it to take everyone, but along the way, everyone might have a slightly different journey. Second, hybrid is just the reality. It is going to require rethinking a little bit about your architecture from a network to a management to an application standpoint. But it's important to have a vision for where you want to go, because this is a reality that's here for many, many years ahead. And then finally, the journey is long, it's complex, but we're here to support you, whether it's through PSO, through the many partners we have here at the conference, from the engineering teams, from the customer teams. We're here to help you be successful. There's a lot of resources and tools and guides. And so please, reach out if you need help with your migration. And thank you.